Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Agile Accountability, a leadership workshop. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving access and knowledge for all in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in just a moment, the Nasdaq Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. And second, we are going to be collecting live questions during the event. We'll try to answer some if we have enough time. Otherwise, we'll share those answers afterwards, as well as a few other resources following the event. So please make sure to submit those questions for Mike in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Narit Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls to step back, see how everyone's doing. This first poll will ask, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about your business? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And I'll give it a few moments for folks to respond here. Awesome. Wonderful. I'll give it one more moment. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Awesome. We got optimism coming up in the lead. Always great to see. And I see we also have some feelings of anxiety and surviving as well. So hopefully this shows you that whatever you're feeling, you are not alone. And I'm very confident that our topic and insights today will be really helpful in helping alleviate some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch the second one. What is keeping you up at night? Is it finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit about your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can make sure that the programs and resources in development will be meaningful and relevant for all of you. Awesome. We got folks from Texas, DC, Baltimore, New York, North Carolina, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Georgia. Awesome. Rwanda, Colorado. Welcome, welcome. So great to see all of you dialing in from all over the place. Always wonderful. All right, I'll give this one more moment on the poll. Going once, going twice. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, looks like we got finance and sales coming up in the lead together, and then we got scale and pivot and all across the board. So wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating. Super helpful. And without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Mike Miles, Fractional Chief of Staff at Venture. Mike, it's such a pleasure as always to have you. So welcome back and over to you.
Good morning and afternoon, evening, everybody. It's always just a thrill to connect with this cohort at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. As you were chiming in from where you're calling from, just a couple shout outs. I see a friend of mine from Rwanda is calling in, so it reminds me that I need to reach back out to you, and I'll do that offline. I saw somebody chiming in from Texas. My youngest brother just moved to Texas. He works for FEMA, and so I might connect you with my brother who's trying to set up shop in Texas as well. Otherwise, great to see everybody. Let me see if I can get my deck presentation shared. without any technical challenges. Bear with me as I get this going. Okay, I'm assuming you can see my slides. If not, Anna or Michelle, give me a shout, but I'll just go ahead with the assumption that everybody can see what I'm presenting. The
Looks great.
second, great, thank you. The second reason I'm excited is because this topic of agile accountability, I fundamentally believe that as early stage founders and entrepreneurs, that unlocking your team and inspiring them to work and be accountable for not just their output, but their outcomes is the fundamental key to success for any company, whether you're early stage or not. And I'll share some reasons behind that excitement and passion here in just a second. But by way of self-introduction, I'm currently a chief of staff at a company called Venture. It's a health tech company. I advise and invest in a number of small companies, and Venture happens to be a company I invested in and was an advisor for maybe 3 years ago. Just recently, we closed our Series A, and so as the company got bigger, they asked me to expand my role from just an occasional advisor to a more formal fractional chief of staff to get them through their Series A and maybe a couple months beyond. And so that's why you see my role as fractional chief of staff at Venture. That might go away or change or reduce over the next few months as I change my role with that company. Otherwise, I teach entrepreneurship at the University of Arizona, both at the graduate and undergraduate level. That's where I know maybe a couple of you from, so I appreciate you joining me here. I also teach through the executive education department at the University of Arizona. So we have a number of clients that are in need of leadership coaching and development and organizational strategy and so forth. And so I spend a lot of time teaching through that organization. I am on the board of the Watson Institute. I just became the board chair of the Watson Institute based in Boulder, Colorado, and they're a social impact accelerator program. Happy to talk to you more about what Watson does if anybody's interested. And then I'm also a mentor in a program called Unreasonable, the Unreasonable Group, which is also a social impact accelerator program, but focused on more mature Series A type companies. I would be offended if you didn't reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. So I look forward to seeing your outreach, and I'd love to make time to connect with you and hear what you're working on and maybe some of the challenges you're facing if you connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I want to start by talking about why agile accountability matters. Accountability, I think people often confuse that word with tracking and monitoring and outputs, how many widgets you're producing an hour or how many things you're getting done in a day, those kinds of things. I put agile in front of the word accountability because I really want to change this notion of accountability and explain to you why I think accountability can be your organization's superpower if you think about it differently. Here's some of the benefits that I think you can get from focusing on not accountability, but agile accountability. The first is, as I alluded to, it's often the case that people manage or measure outputs. They're easy to quantify. How many widgets you produce an hour, as my example, or how many training sessions you deliver, or how many people attended your webinar. Those things are easy to count, but they have little bearing on the impact that you're trying to make to your organization. And so if you shift your thinking from output to impact, I think you really up-level and supercharge the results that you can get from accountability. So that's one. I think focusing on agile accountability also builds a better culture, a culture where employees own the things that they're working on and own the success of the company and are more engaged. It also encourages your employees to learn from their mistakes and adapt and be willing to adapt as the company pivots and build resilience around that adaptation, not be frustrated because things are changing, but really embrace the learnings that cause the company to change. Of course, as a leader, you're all leaders of your organizations. This is a tool, agile accountability is a tool that's going to help you really increase your leadership effectiveness. And then the last thing I want to mention, if you're struggling to recruit and retain your team, it's well documented that companies that focus on agile accountability do a much better job of recruiting and retaining their teams because of the improvements to the team culture. So if you weren't convinced about agile accountability, hopefully those data points can help lead you toward believing that agile accountability could be a superpower for your organization. I want to set the foundation here by saying a couple things. The first is one thing that you need to do as a leader is to make sure the purpose of the organization is clear. I think there's three levels of purpose that I want you to think about as a leader. The first is, what's the purpose of your organization? Why the company exists in the first place? Hopefully, if I ran into you in the hallway or we took an elevator up to the 5th floor together, you would be able to tell me why you formed such a company and what your purpose is as an organization. The second thing is, if you have enough, if you have employees and those employees are in individual teams or work units, how do you think about the purpose of those teams within your organization and how they contribute to the purpose? So I think that also needs some clarity. And then the most important thing is to make sure everybody in the organization feels like the work that they're doing is contributing to the purpose of their team and the organization. So that's what I mean by clarity of purpose. And it's probably the single biggest thing that you can do as a leader to make sure everybody in the company feels like they're contributing to the company's overall success. The second thing is that employees generally want three things in their role. The first is purpose. We just spoke about purpose. The second is autonomy. They want the space and freedom to make decisions about how to best accomplish the goals that they're assigned to. They want the ability to innovate in different ways to meet those goals. They want the ability to maybe work at their own pace and today, especially work at home or work in the office. So if you think about what the impact of the desired impact of the work they're doing, giving them the autonomy to do it in a way that best meets their needs and their style, I think is one key thing that you can do as a leader. And then mastery, the last thing, is the ability for them to take risks and make mistakes will lead to their pursuit of more important goals. If you're a very risk-averse organization, you're unlikely to get employees that sign up for big goals because the cost of failure is too high. But if instead you're an organization that focuses on and embraces the opportunity to learn from mistakes and not punish people because they made mistakes, you'll get much bigger goals, a much bigger pursuit of larger goals from your team. So purpose, autonomy, and mastery are things that you can really invest in your own culture to support. And then the very last thing, at least in this section, that I want you to think about is there's a significant distinction between goals that measure outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And I want to tell you what I mean by outputs and outcomes and impacts, just so you understand. So my example here is that outputs, if you assign your team the challenge of fixing 3 bugs in the user experience, you say, I want you to fix bugs number 3, 5, and 7. They might fix those bugs by the end of the week. But as a leader, what you're really looking to do is hopefully something larger than the engineering team just fixing 3 bugs in the product. Ideally, as a leader, what you're really looking to do is drive fewer customer support tickets, perhaps. Right? So your goal is to reduce the burden on customer support. You think that maybe engineering team can fix 3 bugs that are driving most of those calls. But as a leader, what you're really trying to do is not just fix 3 bugs, but really reduce the burden on customer support. So reducing the burden on customer support is what I would consider an outcome. It's the thing that changes as a result of fixing those 3 bugs. And then the last thing is the impact. So you have these outcomes. Maybe I reduce the burden on customer support. What you really, really care about is the fact that customer support is a significant contributor to the cost of your organization. You want to reduce that cost. And so if you fix those 3 bugs, maybe you get fewer customer support tickets, and that in turn will result in an improvement in the bottom line. Goal setting with this in mind, where you're challenging your team members with goals that are oriented around outcomes and impacts, is a much more effective way to get to those impacts as opposed to you assigning goals about outputs. So if I just assign your team the assignment of fixing 3 bugs, they might fix those 3 bugs. But what happens if fixing those 3 bugs does not result in a reduction in customer support costs? You kind of miss the opportunity to achieve the outcome that you were looking for. So assigning the engineering team the goal or the outcome of reducing customer support tickets is really what you're looking for, I think, here. So that's the distinction between output, outcome, and impact. And I think your role as a leader is to make sure that you're setting goals at the right elevation. And very rarely is the elevation that you're looking to set goals at the output level. It's most likely at the outcome level. I want to talk a little bit more about your role as a leader. So a couple of principles, though. One, the first principle is that one size does not fit all. You might think of a great leader in your experience, either you've read about or you've had the opportunity to work with or work for. I would bet for most of you, one thing that makes that leader that you're thinking about a great leader is their ability to flex their leadership style depending on the situation. And I think the same thing is true of you as well. There are different needs that your organization has, and being able to interpret the needs of either the individuals on the team or the organization as a whole, and then apply that right leadership style is one of the things that's going to make you a superstar leader. The second principle is the leadership tools that you use to coach an individual are different than the leadership tools that you use to lead a team. And I'm going to get into more details about that here in just a second, but just remember that when you're coaching and mentoring an individual on the team, your goal is to make sure that you're unlocking that individual's potential. And they might be at different stages of maturity in terms of what they're working on. And so what you need to do as a leader is going to be different depending on that stage of maturity. But your goal is to unlock that individual's potential. When you lead a team, what you want to be thinking about there more is ensuring that they have a clear direction, that you're facilitating accountability across the whole team, enabling that team to collaborate more and those kinds of things. So the skills you need to coach an individual are very different than the skills you need in order to lead a team. So here's what I think about when you're leading an individual. So you can think of individuals in 4 different stages of maturity on any given task. They can be a first-timer, they can be a learner, they can be a contributor, and eventually, ideally, they become an expert. I want to give you an example of a brain surgeon. So maybe it's your first day as a brain surgeon, it's your very first day as a brain surgeon. And if I, as your boss of all the brain surgeons in the hospital, kind of leave you alone in the operating room for the first time, you're not going to feel very comfortable, confident, successful in the operating room, likely. You're really going to want the comfort of your boss standing over your shoulder and making sure that you're doing brain surgery correctly and safely and most positive outcome for your patient. So your needs as a first-timer brain surgeon really are, for me as your leader, to provide step-by-step guidance and structure and just somebody there to tell you step-by-step what's expected. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a world-renowned brain surgeon, like people reach out to you from all corners of the planet and say, gosh, if I need brain surgery, I'm going to that person. You're that level of an expert. You don't want your boss in the operating room with you telling you exactly what to do step by step. And so that example, I think, gives you the range of what leadership skills you need to apply depending on whether your employee is a first-timer, learner, contributor, or expert. You either need to provide, step-by-step guidance if they're a first-timer, or if they're an expert, you need to really trust them to do their own work because likely they know how to do that work better than you could, even though you're the manager. So with leadership styles, many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the leadership styles that I have represented here: servant leadership, delegative leadership, and coaching leadership. So those leadership styles, here I intend those to mean leadership styles you apply to a team, not an individual. So the leadership styles that best support agile accountability are things like servant leadership. And servant leadership really is about empowering teams by removing obstacles that are in their way. Maybe they need more resources, or they have a dependency on another team that they need supported. And then fostering their autonomy as a team. So your role as a servant leader is remove obstacles and foster autonomy. You might also be in a role or position where you can delegate more. So delegative leadership, where you're giving ownership of a task or an outcome to competent teams. The third style that I think is aligned with Agile accountability is this coaching leadership style, that you work with teams that are maybe new to a space to develop that self-accountability by providing some guidance and growth for that team. So these three leadership styles, I would choose if you're trying to develop an organization that really embraces this idea of agile accountability. And you might mix and match these three leadership styles or some combination of those at any given time. So they're not meant to be mutually exclusive, or the dominant leadership style in your toolbox. You can flex across all three of these leadership styles as the need warrants. But these are leadership styles that I think best support this idea of agile accountability. The ones that don't support agile accountability, obviously autocratic, like top-down control, telling everybody in your team all the time exactly what to do step by step. Micromanagement, managing the team to outputs instead of outcomes really kills this idea of self-accountability and agile accountability. And then laissez-faire leadership, where you're kind of standoffish, you're a little bit aloof. I think teams still need direction. And so laissez-faire doesn't really work if the team doesn't have direction. They're not self-directed. So I would say stay away from these styles and really embrace these styles. Okay, because we only have a half hour, we're already to the point where we're wrapping up. So I just want to mention 6 quick things, 6 or 7 quick things. The first thing is providing clarity about the organization's purpose really inspires teams and team members and provides a useful North Star if the team is looking for something to make decisions against. So investing in clarity about the organization and individual's purpose in that organization really, really, really is probably the most important thing that I would take away from today's discussion. The second thing is employees have a really strong desire for roles that give them purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And your investment in a culture that supports those 3 things is probably the second most important thing that I would take away from today's discussion. The last thing that I kind of put in the first section of this discussion is, if you're measuring outputs, you're likely not going to create a culture that focuses on agile accountability. What you need to do is think about the outcomes that you're seeking and let the team decide what's the best approach and the outputs that might accrue to that outcome. If you give them the goal of an outcome, but then dictate how they're going to get there, what they're going to do is revert back to just accomplishing the outputs and not really care about the outcome. Your leadership style needs to be flexible. We just spoke about that. Whether you're working with an individual on a team or working with a team, you need to be adaptive in your leadership style depending on what the individual or the team needs. And then related to that, teams need different support than individuals. And so ideally, you're developing your leadership style and leadership flexibility so that you have multiple tools in the toolbox that allow you to support individuals different than teams, and teams, depending on how mature that team is, you might need to flex your leadership style as well. The last thing I want to mention is that effective leaders really, really, really practice these leadership styles that support agile accountability and avoid the things that don't support agile accountability. And they do that intentionally. You might find a very rare occasion to be autocratic, like maybe the building's on fire and you want the team to exit the building as fast and safely as possible. In that case, of course, be an autocrat and tell people exactly what to do and encourage them to move fast and so forth. Rarely do you need an autocratic leadership style in your organization. I would much prefer that you favor the leadership styles that are conducive to agile leadership, like coaching and delegative and so forth. Before we turn it over to Q&A for a few minutes, I just want to point out three books that I think are really give you a lot more detail in this space. Daniel Pink's Drive, you might have read that book. He's the one that kind of popularized this notion that teams need purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So if you want to drill down on that particular thing, pick up the book Drive. This idea of leaders eat last. This idea is spoken about by Simon Sinek. Many of you have heard of Simon Sinek. His most popular talk, I think, is The Importance of Why. But he also talked about why eat last, and that is this idea that servant leadership is really about making sure your teams are empowered and enabled to make their own decisions and work with passion toward the company's purpose. What are the things that the leader can do to be that servant leadership by removing obstacles and providing the teams the direction and the resources that they need so that they can drive their own success, and you don't have to manage them to achieve that success. So those three books I'd encourage you to read as you have time. And with that, I think we're going to switch over to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you as always, Mike. Really wonderful insights and strategies that they can, start to think about implementing right away. So I think we have time for a couple of questions. And we had someone, I know in the audience, we likely have, some LLCs, some sole proprietors. But, we have someone wondering, do these kinds of strategies and techniques apply for nonprofit or, social benefit corporations?
Yeah, I don't think there's any limit on these strategies and techniques, regardless of the team, whether you're working in the social sector or public sector or private sector. And in fact, one of my portfolio companies is in fact a nonprofit. They're one of the case studies that I reflected on when I was putting this discussion together. They're challenged by some of the things that I'm talking about, right? They really need to focus more on outcomes instead of outputs. For example, their leaders need to figure out how to broaden their leadership tool set so that they can support individuals and teams where they are and encourage them to pursue more agile accountability. So yeah, absolutely. I don't see any limits there between social sector and private sector businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So yeah, kind of comes down to like, identifying the kind of team you have and going from there. So
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
wonderful. And on that note, I know we had somebody else that was wondering, um, if you just had any, examples of companies that you've worked with or seen, doing this work and, what are kind of some of the highlights in terms of impact that it's had on the business or the founder?
Yeah. I'll speak, I think maybe a couple examples. You can rein me in if we're running out of time, but my last team at Microsoft, I really tried to embrace a lot of the principles that we're talking about here. And I thought that team was just wildly successful. So I had taken a role as a CSR role in the company. We were a brand new team inside the company. I was employee number one, and we grew that team to 75 people or so. And so there was a lot of similarities between that and a startup that most of you are probably representing. But this idea that, we defined the purpose for our organization and individuals on the team knew how their work contributed to that purpose. We wanted to make sure that the teams had autonomy and mastery to go pursue the goals of the organization on their own. It really was such a great culture, and the team, I think, as a result, achieved far more than I originally had envisioned for that team because individuals on the team were kind of empowered and supported and pursuing not just goals that I had for them, but goals that far exceeded my expectations. So that's one example at Microsoft. Outside of Microsoft, yeah, I was working with one of my consulting clients, and they were struggling to get more out of their team. Their CEO felt like he was spending a lot of time kind of dictating specific things that needed to be done and tracking whether they got done on time. And figuring out why he was spending so much time just managing the output of the organization. And as soon as we started shifting the culture, the team themselves became more engaged, and he had to spend far less time in terms of creating, checklists of things that needed to be done and monitoring the fact that they got done on time, and really just created opportunities for the team to contribute even more. And so that was a pretty successful turnaround, I think, that illustrates the answer to the question that somebody asked.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really wonderful, especially, I know we have plenty of entrepreneurs in the audience that maybe they're still solopreneurs, maybe they have a small team, and just kind of recognizing, as you as the founder are kind of trying to focus in on the work that's most important for that you're positioned to do successfully, and making sure that adding that team isn't adding more work for you. So that's really important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it is easy to get in that trap. Adding more people, I can't afford to add more people because it's going to take more time to manage. If you're thinking about that, you're obviously not adopting some of these agile accountability practices.
Right. Awesome. Well, Mike, this has been so wonderful. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom you wanted to leave with everyone here, what would that be?
Gosh, I think the making sure everybody in the company knows the purpose of the organization and their role in supporting that, and given the opportunity to pursue their contribution in a way that isn't grounded by kind of the output that the CEO is looking for, but rather the outcome, the goal that the CEO is looking for.
Amazing. Awesome, Mike. This has been so wonderful. On behalf of the Nasdaq Center and everyone here today, we are so thankful for you to join us once again. So thank you. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using the link that's going to be posted in the chat. For those questions that we didn't get to, we'll follow up with some answers and resources that may be helpful as well. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon. Thanks, everyone.